Before we start, take a moment to like and subscribe. After 4 long decades of wandering through the scorching, unforgiving desert, the Israelites finally stood at the cusp of their promised inheritance. The dust of their journey, a fine, ever-present memory of their hardship, settled on the parched earth as they gazed upon their first and most formidable obstacle. This was not a simple settlement, but the awe-inspiring, unassailable fortress city of Jericho. It rose from the valley floor like a monolithic challenge, a symbol of human ingenuity and defiance. Its defenses were legendary, an architectural marvel of its time. An outer wall, a sheer retaining wall of immense stone blocks, formed the city's base. Above it, a steep rampart of earth sloped upwards to a second, even thicker wall constructed from sun-baked mud bricks, reaching a height that seemed to scrape the very sky. These two walls, a double-layered barrier separated by a wide and well-defended rampart, made Jericho a fortress that laughed at conventional warfare. The city's inhabitants watched from their battlements, confident in their unbreachable haven. They saw a tired, dusty army, a people without siege engines or advanced weaponry, and felt no fear. Joshua, a man who had walked in the shadow of Moses, felt the immense weight of the moment. His military training screamed at the impossibility of the task. He was a seasoned commander, but his mind could not conjure a strategy to defeat this Goliath of stone. His army was not one of engineers, but of a people who had learned to depend on miracles. It was in this moment of profound strategic failure that a divine presence appeared to him. The instructions he received were not of tactics, but of a test of a different kind of strength. The plan was not to attack, but to obey. They were to march, in silence, around the city once a day for 6 days. Their only weapons would be the Ark of the Covenant, the priests who carried it, and 7 more priests with trumpets made from ram's horns. It was a strategy that completely subverted human reason, requiring a faith that was more potent than any sword. The sun rose on the first day, bathing the valley in a golden light that revealed a surreal spectacle to the people of Jericho. Instead of a furious assault, the Israelite army formed a column. They moved without a single battle cry, without the clatter of a single weapon. The vanguard of armed men was followed by 7 priests, their faces set in a profound solemnity, blowing a low, continuous sound from their trumpets. Behind them came the priests bearing the Ark of the Covenant, a sacred symbol of their God's presence. The rest of the army followed, moving in absolute silence. They completed 1 full circuit of the colossal city walls, then turned and retreated as silently as they had come. From the ramparts, a wave of ridicule and laughter cascaded down. The defenders of Jericho jeered, throwing insults and mocking gestures. They believed this was a sign of the Israelites' foolishness, or their cowardice. A strange, pathetic ritual from a desperate people. But the laughter began to curdle on the 2nd day when the same bizarre procession repeated itself, and the 3rd and the 4th. The mockery and the jeers slowly faded, replaced by a growing, nagging unease. The persistent low drone of the trumpets became a constant, haunting presence, a sound that seemed to bore into their very souls. This was not a normal enemy. Their silence was more terrifying than any war cry, their relentless repetition a more potent weapon than any siege engine. The people of Jericho found themselves unable to focus on their daily lives, constantly drawn to the ramparts to watch the silent, eerie procession that circled their city with an almost supernatural precision. The days bled into one another, and with each silent lap, the confidence of the city's inhabitants eroded, replaced by a creeping, suffocating dread. For the Israelites, this march was a crucible, a test of their endurance and faith. They felt the weight of their own doubt, the temptation to question the wisdom of their leader. But they kept walking, day after day, their steadfast obedience becoming a single unbreakable act of faith. The air on the morning of the 7th day felt different. A palpable tension hung over the entire valley, a sense of finality that was impossible to ignore. The Israelite army, no longer tired or hesitant, moved with a single, unified purpose. The commands were clear: 7 circuits, not one. The priests' trumpets rang out with a sharper, more urgent tone as they led the procession. Each lap was a beat in a final grand crescendo. The people of Jericho no longer mocked. They watched from their walls, their faces pale with a mix of terror and disbelief. The first circuit was a study in profound stillness. The Israelite army's footsteps were a quiet rhythm in the dawn light. On the city walls, every voice was silenced. The people of Jericho were a row of frightened statues, their eyes fixed on the ark as it passed. On the second and third passes, a tremor of fear began to run through them. They clutched at the hilt of their swords and looked to their captains for some form of reassurance that never came. The rhythmic, continuous sound of the trumpets was a physical pressure against their ears, a sound that seemed to shake the very foundations of their confidence. By the 5th lap, the psychological toll was becoming visible. Soldiers on the walls began to tremble, their grips on their spears slackening. Whispers, a mix of prayers and desperate questions, broke the silence on their side of the walls. The children of Jericho, who had once laughed, now hid behind their mothers' skirts, peering out with wide, fearful eyes. On the 6th lap, the silence of the Israelite army became a suffocating weight. Their unwavering resolve was a stark contrast to the growing panic on the ramparts. The men of Jericho began to look at one another, a silent question passing between them. What kind of enemy are they? What power does this silence hold? Finally, the 7th and final circuit began. The pace of the Israelites did not falter. It was a march of destiny, each step a beat of a final thunderous drum roll. The priests' trumpets wailed with an almost human intensity, their sound a piercing call that seemed to fill the very air. As the last step of the final circuit was completed, the trumpets fell silent. The entire Israelite army stood motionless, a hushed stillness hanging over the valley so complete that it was almost deafening. The only sound was the pounding of their own hearts and the gentle whisper of the wind. A moment passed in eternity as the world held its breath. Joshua, standing before his people, raised his arm. The 7 priests lifted their horns and a single, long, earth-shaking blast ripped through the air, followed by a sudden unified command from Joshua. Shout, for the Lord has given you the city. At once, the 6-day silence was broken by the most powerful sound ever heard from their people, a battle cry of human rage, but a primal roar of triumphant faith, a sound that carried the weight of 4 decades of hardship and a single-minded trust in a divine promise. The collective shout was still echoing when a deep, thunderous groan erupted from the very ground beneath the city. It wasn't the sharp jolt of an earthquake, but the slow, agonizing sound of something ancient and immense giving way. Cracks appeared on the magnificent stone walls, snaking upwards like lightning strikes. The fortress of mud bricks atop the rampart began to shudder, its foundations unable to withstand the invisible force. Then, with a series of deafening roars, the entire double wall of Jericho began to disintegrate. The stones didn't just break. They crumbled and fell outward, forming perfect wide ramps of rubble that spilled out onto the plain. A massive cloud of dust billowed into the sky, a final choking testament to the city's sudden demise. The noise was immense, a horrifying cacophony of stone on stone, a final cataclysmic roar that drowned out all other sound. The impossible had happened. The great city, which seemed so impenetrable, lay completely exposed. The very walls designed to keep them out had been turned into a convenient bridge, a path straight into the city. The Israelite army, which had no tools for war, now had an open, unobstructed path into the city. They walked in, not to plunder and pillage, but to take what had been promised to them. The fall of Jericho was not a victory of military might or strategic genius. It was a victory of faith, a humbling display of power that proved that with steadfast obedience, even the most impossible of obstacles could be overcome.